The sky above the small human colony was darker than usual, a thick, stormy haze hanging over the world. The planet had been at war for years now. It had seen its fair share of battles, and many human colonies had crumbled under the relentless assault of the alien forces. But today there was a sense of quiet tension in the air, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. The ships from the alien fleet had arrived, descending like shadows, looming over the barren landscape. Their sleek, terrifying forms cut through the clouds, making their presence known to anyone who was brave enough to look up. The human colony, a place where once peaceful families lived and worked, now stood as a fortification, preparing for the next wave of destruction. Among the alien invaders, there was one name that had been whispered with fear across the galaxy: Vayrana. She was known as a force of nature, an unstoppable warrior with claws so powerful that they could tear through the thickest of metal. Her reputation was built on fear, and she carried it with pride. Her mere arrival on a battlefield meant victory for her side. No one had ever been able to stop her, and no one had ever survived her wrath. Today, the human warriors were preparing for what felt like their last stand. The sight of Vayrana's ship made their blood run cold, but none of them were willing to back down. The colony, though battered, still had hope. And at the heart of that hope was one man: Eric. Eric was a soldier, but he was different from the others. He wasn't just a man with a weapon. He was someone who understood what it meant to fight, not just for survival, but for something greater. He had seen death up close more times than he could count, and yet he still believed in something more than just a fight for his life. He believed in the human spirit, the strength of a people who never gave up, no matter the odds. As Eric stood on the rooftop of the fort, looking at the horizon where the alien ships had landed, he could feel the weight of the moment. The wind tugged at his uniform, and the cold bit into his skin, but his gaze never wavered. His mind was focused entirely on what was coming. His fellow soldiers were preparing for battle below, loading weapons, checking their gear, and moving into position. But Eric didn't need to do any of that. He had been through countless battles, and he knew exactly what to expect. The aliens would charge first, their numbers overwhelming. But they had no idea what they were about to face. Vayrana stepped off her ship with a presence that could silence the very air around her. She was tall, her alien features sharp and fierce. Her claws gleamed in the light, the deadly tools capable of rending anything in their path. She was a warrior, a symbol of fear in the galaxy, and she held her posture as though the universe owed her something. Her eyes, glowing with an inner fire, scanned the horizon as she walked towards the human defenses. The soldiers around her shivered, their hands trembling on their weapons. But Vayrana was not looking at them. Her eyes were fixed on something else, something different. Eric. The moment their eyes met, it was as though the world paused. Vayrana could sense the strength in him, something different from all the others. This human was not like the others she had faced before. His gaze wasn't filled with fear, but with something else, something she couldn't quite place. Eric stepped forward, not waiting for anyone's orders. His body was a machine, moving with purpose as he made his way down from the rooftop. The sound of his boots echoed through the quiet streets of the colony as he approached the front lines. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his eyes never leaving the alien warrior standing before him. The soldiers around him muttered nervously, some wondering if it was madness to face her alone. But Eric didn't believe in madness. He believed in choice, the choice to fight, even when the odds were stacked against him, the choice to stand firm, no matter how many enemies stood before him. He walked into the open ground between the human forces and the alien invaders, his posture steady. The ground beneath his feet felt firm, almost comforting. This was where he was meant to be, and he knew it. Vayrana tilted her head slightly as she watched him approach. She was intrigued. The humans, she thought, were weak, fragile, like insects scurrying around in a world much too big for them. Yet this one was different. "You are brave," Vayrana spoke, her voice a low, gravelly sound that seemed to carry across the battlefield. But bravery will not save you from what is coming. Eric didn't flinch. It's not bravery, he said, his voice calm and steady. It's determination. You may be strong, but so are we, and we won't back down. Vayrana smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. We'll see about that. With a swift motion, she unsheathed her claws, and the battle began. The sound of metal clashing against metal filled the air, as Eric and Vayrana squared off. Her claws moved with a terrifying speed, cutting through the air with deadly precision. Eric blocked, dodged, and countered, using every ounce of skill he had. The ground beneath them seemed to shake with each strike. As they fought, Eric realized something. This was not just a battle of strength, it was a battle of wills. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to show the alien warrior that there was more to the human spirit than mere survival. And maybe, just maybe, that was something she would understand. The battlefield was a storm of chaos, with the sound of clashing weapons and shouts filling the air. Eric's breath came in sharp, controlled bursts as he faced off against Vayrana. Her claws gleamed like knives in the midday sun, each swipe a deadly promise. He could feel the weight of her power with every strike, the ground beneath him shaking with the force of her blows. But Eric was not afraid. He had faced countless enemies, but none like her. Vayrana moved with fluid grace, her alien form almost too fast for the human eye to follow. Her claws slashed through the air, cutting through the metal of nearby wreckage and the weapons of soldiers who dared to face her. Yet, despite her deadly speed, Eric's eyes never wavered. He had trained for years to fight opponents who were stronger, faster, and smarter than him. His focus was sharp, and his mind was clear. He blocked her first strike with his sword, the force of the impact sending a shock through his arm. The edge of her claws scraped against his blade, leaving deep marks in the metal. Eric's feet slid back a few inches on the ground, but he didn't lose his balance. His eyes locked onto hers, and he saw something, a flicker of something unfamiliar in the alien's gaze. For a brief moment, he wondered if it was doubt. But before he could think too much about it, she was on him again, her claws flashing toward his chest. Eric dodged just in time, rolling to the side and springing back to his feet. He didn't have the advantage of her strength, but he had something more: experience. The two of them circled each other, their movements like a deadly dance. Vayrana attacked with relentless precision, and Eric responded with calculated counterattacks. He had studied her moves, her patterns, and he knew that every attack had a weakness. But finding that weakness was no easy task. Her speed was unmatched, and her claws could tear through anything in her path. Despite the ferocity of the battle, Eric couldn't help but notice how different this fight felt from any other. Usually, he was fighting for survival, for the lives of the people around him. But with Vayrana, it was more. There was something about her, a quiet strength that intrigued him. She wasn't just a mindless warrior. She was intelligent, calculating, and perhaps alone. As the fight continued, the soldiers around them watched in awe. The human soldiers, though skilled, knew they were no match for the alien warrior. Many of them had already fallen, their bodies scattered across the battlefield. Yet they couldn't take their eyes off Eric. He was holding his own against a force of nature, a creature whose reputation had already shattered the morale of many. Vayrana's eyes narrowed as she advanced on him again. This time, her claws moved faster than before, almost like a blur. Eric barely managed to block the first slash, the force of it sending him staggering backward. He gritted his teeth, but he refused to let her see any sign of weakness. She lunged forward, her claws aimed straight for his throat. But at the last second, Eric stepped aside, using his momentum to push her off balance. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give him a moment to breathe. "Is this really all you have, human?" Vayrana taunted, her voice cold and mocking. "You're fast, but you're no match for me." Eric's response was steady, his voice unwavering. "You're strong, but strength alone won't win this fight. Vayrana paused, her gaze flicking toward him in surprise. For a moment, she seemed to consider his words, as if she was trying to figure him out. Then, without warning, she attacked again. But this time, there was something different in her movements. She was no longer just trying to defeat him. She was testing him. Eric could feel the shift in her approach. Her strikes became more deliberate, less frantic. She was studying him, just as he was studying her. Every time he blocked or dodged, she seemed to take note of his actions. Her attacks became more calculated, as if she was learning from him. The realization hit him like a shockwave. This wasn't just a battle of strength. It was a battle of wits. She wasn't just a mindless beast, and he wasn't just a soldier. They were two warriors, each with their own unique strengths, but neither of them willing to give up. Eric focused harder, using everything he had learned over the years to stay one step ahead. His movements were quicker now, his reactions sharper. He could feel his body tiring, but he refused to show it. He had fought too many battles to give in to exhaustion now. Vayrana, on the other hand, seemed unaffected by the toll the fight was taking on her. Her alien body was built for battle, her endurance far surpassing his own. But even with her strength, Eric could see that she was struggling with something. It wasn't physical. There was something deeper, something in her eyes that told him she was not entirely comfortable with this fight. For a moment, there was a break in the action. Vayrana stepped back, her breath heavy but controlled. Eric did the same, watching her closely. "What do you want, human?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Why do you fight like this?" Eric paused. The question was unexpected, but it was one he had asked himself many times. He had fought for so long, but never once had he stopped to question the reason behind it. "I fight because I believe in what's worth fighting for," he said simply. "I fight for my people, for my world, and for the future." Vayrana's expression softened, just for a moment. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that Eric couldn't quite place. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the cold, determined look of a warrior. Without a word, Vayrana lunged at him again, but this time, Eric was ready. He was no longer just fighting to survive. He was fighting to prove something, to himself, to her, and to everyone watching. The battle between them was far from over, but for the first time, Eric felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was more to this fight than he had realized, and maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. The air between Eric and Vayrana crackled with tension. The sound of clashing weapons and the distant explosions from the battlefield faded into the background, leaving only the two of them. Their breath was heavy, their bodies covered in sweat and dirt, but neither showed any sign of backing down. Eric's muscles burned from the constant motion, but he kept his focus sharp. He knew he couldn't afford to falter, not with Vayrana's claws so close, so deadly. He had fought in countless battles, but there was something about this alien warrior that made him feel both alive and humbled. Vayrana, for the first time since the battle began, seemed to hesitate. Her glowing eyes narrowed as she watched him, a subtle shift in her stance that didn't go unnoticed by Eric. She was studying him now, her sharp gaze trying to read him. He could feel her eyes on him, weighing every move he made. Eric's grip tightened around his sword, his gaze never leaving hers. He was no longer just defending himself. He was waiting, observing, trying to learn. For the first time in the fight, he saw the cracks in her invincible facade. There was more to her than just strength. There was depth, something hidden beneath the surface. The next few moments seemed to stretch out. Neither of them made a move. Vayrana's claws, which had seemed so unstoppable before, now hovered just inches away from Eric, but she didn't strike. The world seemed to pause, as if they were both caught in a moment of understanding. "You're different from the others," Vayrana said, her voice softer now, almost curious. The cold, mocking tone that had filled her earlier words was gone. It was replaced with something else, a respect, perhaps. Most humans would have fled by now. Yet, here you stand. Eric took a slow breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He had been in many battles, faced many enemies, but this was different. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to understand, to prove to her, and to himself, that humanity had something more to offer than just fear. I don't run from challenges, Eric said, his voice steady. I fight for something bigger than myself. I fight for my people, my world. We don't give up, even when the odds are against us. Vayrana's eyes flickered for a moment, a flash of something deeper than just the cold warrior she had been moments before. She lowered her claws slightly, tilting her head as she observed him. You fight for others, she asked, her voice almost thoughtful. How foolish. The galaxy is a cruel place. There's no room for weakness in it. Eric didn't flinch. He had heard those words before, spoken by those who and now she seemed to return it. But it was more than that. There was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something Eric couldn't quite name. You're not like the others, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of war. Her words seemed almost like a confession, something raw, something real. Most would have run from me by now, or attacked without thought. But you stand your ground. I never expected that. Eric shook his head, his voice calm. I'm not afraid of you, Vayrana. I respect you, but I don't fear you. Her eyes flickered, a mixture of surprise and something else, something deeper. Vayrana had expected fear. It was all she had ever known. Fear from her enemies, fear from those she had conquered. But Eric was different. He wasn't afraid of her strength, nor did he seem intimidated by her reputation. He had something she hadn't encountered before, belief. Belief in something bigger than herself, bigger than their fight. That's the difference, human, she said, her tone slightly softer. I've never met anyone who stood up to me without fear. You think that your belief makes you strong, but it's only a weakness. Eric's eyes didn't waver. Belief is what keeps us alive. It's what gives us purpose, Vayrana. Without it, we're just existing, waiting for the end. She stared at him for a long moment, her alien eyes searching his face. For a brief second, Eric wondered if she might strike again. But then, to his surprise, she lowered her gaze. Her shoulders slumped slightly as if the weight of their conversation had become too much for her to bear. I once believed in something, Vayrana said, her voice quieter now. I believed in the cause of my people. I fought for them, protected them. But that was before everything changed. Before I was forced to become something else. Eric didn't speak right away. He could tell that she wasn't just talking about the war. There was something more, a personal history that went beyond the battlefield. Something that had shaped her into the warrior she had become. And for the first time, he felt a flicker of sympathy for her, a recognition of the pain she had endured. I was once a protector, she continued, her voice distant, as if she was reliving her past. I fought to keep my people safe. I believed in a future where we could all live in peace. But peace didn't come. War did. And with it, betrayal. I lost everything. My people, my home. And I became a weapon, a tool of destruction. Eric listened carefully, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had never seen her as anything other than an enemy, a force of destruction. But now he saw her as a person who had lost everything she once believed in. I became what they wanted me to be, Vayrana said bitterly. A killer, a destroyer. The galaxy saw me as nothing more than a tool. And now, I'm lost. I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore. Eric stepped closer to her, his voice gentle but firm. You don't have to be that anymore, Vayrana. You don't have to be the weapon they made you. You can choose to fight for something else, something better. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was a long silence between them. The wind blew, and the distant sounds of the battlefield seemed to fade into nothing. All that was left was the two of them, standing in the middle of the chaos, connected by something deeper than the war that surrounded them. "You think I can change?" Vayrana asked, her voice almost a whisper. "After everything I've done, after everything I've become, can someone like me ever find redemption?" Eric's gaze softened. "Everyone has the choice to change, Vayrana. No matter how far you've fallen, you can always choose to fight for something better. You don't have to be a killer. You don't have to be alone anymore." Her claws twitched, but she didn't raise them. For the first time, Eric saw her not as an enemy to be feared, but as a person who had been broken by the war. She wasn't just a ruthless warrior. She was someone who had lost her way and was now searching for something to believe in again. I don't know how," she admitted, her voice filled with uncertainty. Eric smiled softly. "It's not about knowing how. It's about starting. It's about choosing a new path, no matter how hard it may be." For the first time, Vayrana seemed unsure of herself, and it was a side of her that Eric had never expected to see. She wasn't the unbeatable warrior who had crushed her enemies with ease. She was a woman who had lost everything and was now standing on the edge, unsure of where to go next. "Maybe I can start," Vayrana said quietly, almost to herself. "Maybe I can choose a new fight." Eric nodded, his voice steady. "You can, and I'll be right here, helping you, if you need it." The war still raged around them, but for the first time, Vayrana felt a spark of something new, something that hadn't been there for a long time. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for her after all. And as she looked at Eric, standing beside her, she realized that maybe humans weren't as weak as the galaxy had always believed. Maybe they had something worth fighting for after all. The battlefield had quieted down, the fighting now reduced to small skirmishes in the distance. For a few moments, the chaos seemed far away, as if the war itself had taken a backseat to something far more important. Eric and Vayrana stood facing each other, the air around them thick with the weight of their conversation, the sounds of their breathing, the wind rustling through the broken remnants of the battlefield, were all that filled the silence between them. The truce had been an unexpected turn of events. Eric hadn't anticipated this kind of shift, nor had Vayrana. Yet, here they were, standing together in the aftermath of a battle that neither had finished, caught in a delicate moment where the future felt uncertain. Vayrana had lowered her claws, the deadly weapons now resting at her sides. The anger that had once defined her every move was gone, replaced by something softer, something more vulnerable. Eric could see it in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, yes, but also a quiet acceptance of the strange connection that had formed between them. "Why are you helping me?" Vayrana's voice broke through the silence, her words filled with confusion and wonder. "I've been a weapon of destruction for so long. Why would you choose to fight with me, not against me?" Eric didn't hesitate. He had already given this thought during their fight. And now, the words came easily. "Because I believe there's more to you than just what you've been made to be," he said. "I don't believe in fighting just for the sake of it. I believe in fighting for a purpose, something worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, you can still find that purpose." Vayrana's eyes searched his face, as though she was trying to make sense of him. She had been taught to believe in strength above all else, in the survival of the fittest, and in a galaxy where only the strongest and most ruthless survived. But Eric was different. He didn't care about her strength. He didn't see her as just a weapon to be defeated. He saw her as a person who could still choose what to fight for. "I don't know if I can believe that," she admitted, her voice quiet. "I've seen too much, done too much. The galaxy doesn't give second chances." "Maybe it doesn't," Eric said, his voice steady. "But we do. You don't have to stay on the path you've been forced onto. The future isn't written in stone. It's what you make of it." For the first time, Vayrana's gaze softened. She looked away for a moment, as though considering his words. The weight of her past, of the countless battles and the endless destruction, was still heavy on her shoulders. But something in Eric's simple, unwavering belief was breaking through the walls she had built around herself. He wasn't asking her to forget what she had done. He was offering her a chance to move forward, a chance to choose. "I've killed so many," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever make up for it." "You don't have to," Eric replied. "No one can change the past. But the future is a different story. You can start fresh. You can make a difference now, not through destruction, but through something else." Vayrana fell silent, her mind racing. Could it really be that simple? Could she really change after everything she had done? Her heart ached at the thought of redemption, but deep down, she wondered if she was too far gone, too damaged. The weight of her past was a heavy burden to carry, but Eric's words made her wonder if there was still room for something more. As the minutes passed, she made her decision. The sounds of the battle seemed to fade as she took a step toward him, her claws still at her sides, no longer a threat. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to fight. "I'll fight with you," she said, her voice firm. "Not because you want me to, but because I want to. For the first time, I feel like I have something worth protecting." Eric smiled. "Then let's do it together." The two of them stood side by side, their gazes fixed on the horizon. The human soldiers, who had watched the confrontation between Eric and Vayrana unfold, now looked at them with a mix of confusion and awe. Some of them had never imagined that such a truce would be possible, let alone that a human soldier and a fearsome alien warrior could stand together as allies. But there was something about the way Eric and Vayrana stood, side by side, that made it clear. They weren't enemies anymore. They were comrades, brought together by a shared understanding that there was more to life than just fighting, more to the war than winning or losing. Eric turned to face his soldiers. "We've got work to do," he said, his voice steady but strong. "Vayrana and I are going to lead the charge. We're going to stop this war and protect the future, all of us together." The soldiers, though uncertain, nodded in agreement. They had seen their commander face impossible odds before, but this was something new. Eric had always fought for his people, but now he was fighting for something bigger, a future where enemies could become allies, where differences didn't have to lead to destruction. As Vayrana stepped forward beside Eric, she knew that she was no longer the person she had been when she first landed on this planet. She had been a tool of war, a weapon designed to destroy. But now she was a part of something more, a fight for peace, for a future where she could finally choose who she wanted to be. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. Not just for Eric, not just for Vayrana, but for the entire galaxy. It was a fragile hope, but it was hope nonetheless. And for the first time, Vayrana could see a way forward, one where she didn't have to fight alone, and one where she could finally begin to make things right. The day of reckoning had arrived. The war had been raging for years, but now, with the combined efforts of the human forces and Vayrana by his side, Eric knew they were on the verge of something bigger, something that could change everything. The final battle loomed ahead, and it was their chance to end the conflict that had torn so many worlds apart. Eric stood at the front of the human line, his armor battered but his resolve unshaken. The soldiers around him, though exhausted from the long months of fighting, were ready. They trusted him, and for the first time, they also trusted Vayrana. The alien warrior who had once been a symbol of terror now stood alongside them as an ally, her claws resting at her sides, her posture strong and determined. "Today, we end this," Eric said, his voice loud enough for his soldiers to hear. The air was thick with tension, the calm before the storm. "This is the fight that will decide our future. We fight not just for survival, but for something better." The soldiers nodded, their eyes fixed on him. They had seen what Eric had done, how he had faced impossible odds with unwavering determination. And now, with Vayrana at their side, they knew they could win. She wasn't just an alien warrior, she was their ally, and they would fight as one. Vayrana stood at Eric's side, her alien eyes scanning the battlefield. The enemy forces were vast, their ships looming in the sky above. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had chosen this path, not out of duty or fear, but because she believed in the cause. For the first time, she was fighting for something worth protecting. Something that didn't involve destruction, but rather the hope of a better future. "We're ready," Vayrana said, her voice steady. She had come a long way from the ruthless warrior who had once been feared across the galaxy. Now, she was a protector, and nothing would stop her from standing with Eric and his people. As the enemy forces began to move forward, Eric's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. He looked at Vayrana, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding. They didn't need to speak. They both knew what was at stake. The battle began with a deafening roar. The enemy ships descended from the sky, their weapons firing at the human defenses. The ground shook as explosions rang out, sending dust and debris flying. Eric's soldiers held their ground, firing back with everything they had. But Eric knew that this wasn't just about firepower. It was about strategy, about unity. And with Vayrana by his side, he knew they had a chance. "Form up," Eric shouted to his soldiers. "Push forward. We have to take their command center." Vayrana was already in motion, her claws gleaming in the sunlight as she charged forward with incredible speed. Her movements were a blur as she tore through the enemy ranks, her strength unmatched. But it wasn't just her power that made the difference. It was her heart, her desire to fight for something greater than herself. Eric followed closely behind her, his sword cutting through the enemy forces with precision. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a leader, a symbol of hope for those who had lost everything. His soldiers followed him with unwavering trust, pushing forward with a strength they had never known before. The clash between the two sides was fierce. The enemy soldiers were well-trained and ruthless, but they had never faced an enemy like Eric and Vayrana. Together, they cut through the battlefield like a storm, each move carefully planned, each strike with purpose. Vayrana was a whirlwind of claws and strength, while Eric moved with the calm focus of a seasoned fighter. But despite their efforts, the enemy forces were relentless. They regrouped, pushing back with ferocity. Eric could see the strain on his soldiers, their numbers dwindling as the battle raged on. He knew they needed to act fast. They couldn't afford to lose any more ground. "Vayrana," Eric shouted over the noise of the battle. "We need to reach the command center. Once we take it, the enemy will fall apart." Vayrana didn't hesitate. She nodded, her eyes steely with determination. "Lead the way." With a roar, she charged forward, cutting through the enemy lines like a force of nature. Eric followed closely behind, his sword flashing as he cut down anyone who dared to stand in his way. Together, they fought as one, their movements synchronized in a way that only warriors who trusted each other could achieve. As they reached the enemy command center, Eric's heart raced. They were close, so close to ending this. But there was one final obstacle standing in their way. The enemy leader, a massive alien warlord, stood at the entrance, blocking their path. "You think you can stop me?" The warlord sneered, his voice booming across the battlefield. "I am the one who will decide the fate of this galaxy, not you." Vayrana stepped forward, her claws gleaming with a deadly light. "You've already lost," she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "The future is ours now." The warlord roared in anger, charging at them with a speed that belied his size. But Vayrana was ready. She met him head-on, her claws clashing with his weapon in a shower of sparks. Eric moved quickly, using his sword to strike at the warlord's defenses, each strike carefully placed. The battle was intense, but Eric could see the warlord weakening. Vayrana's strength was too much for him to handle. With a final powerful blow, Vayrana disarmed the warlord, sending him crashing to the ground. "It's over," Eric said, his voice filled with triumph. "You've lost." The enemy forces, seeing their leader defeated, began to retreat. The battle was won. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Eric and Vayrana stood side by side, victorious. The war was over. The galaxy would change, and it was because of their bravery, their unity, and their belief in something greater than themselves. "We did it," Vayrana said, her voice filled with a quiet sense of peace. Eric smiled, his heart light. "We did. Together." And for the first time in a long time, both of them knew that the future was theirs to shape. A future where they didn't have to fight alone, but where they could build something better, together. The war had ended, but the weight of its aftermath was still heavy in the air. Eric and Vayrana stood at the edge of the battlefield, looking out over the wreckage of the conflict. The land around them, once a symbol of destruction, was now slowly beginning to heal. The skies, once dark with the smoke of war, were beginning to clear. It was a new day, not just for the planet, but for them both. The human soldiers were celebrating their victory, but the cheers were muted. There was a sense of relief, yes, but also quiet reflection. It had been a long, hard fight, and many had been lost along the way. Eric looked around at his comrades, their faces marked with exhaustion and grief. They had fought with everything they had, and now there was a fragile peace. Vayrana, standing beside him, looked out at the horizon. Her eyes, usually filled with the fire of battle, were now softer, filled with something else, a quiet hope. She had come to this planet as an enemy, a conqueror, a weapon of destruction. Now she was no longer that. She had found a new purpose, a new reason to fight. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the weight of her past on her shoulders. "Is this what peace feels like?" Vayrana asked, her voice quiet, as if she was still unsure of the answer. "I've never known anything but war." Eric turned to her, his face soft with understanding. "It's not perfect. There's still a lot of rebuilding to do, but it's a start. It's a chance for something better." Vayrana nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "A chance to build something worth protecting," she said, her words reflecting the change in her. She had spent so much of her life as a tool of war, but now she understood that there was more. There was hope. There was a future. Eric watched her, seeing the transformation in her that he hadn't expected. The fierce alien warrior, the one who had destroyed and conquered, was now standing beside him as an ally. She had chosen this path, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And that, Eric thought, was the greatest strength anyone could have. The camp around them was busy with soldiers tending to the wounded, setting up camps, and preparing to leave. They had won the battle, but there was still work to be done. Eric knew that the hard part wasn't over. The rebuilding would take time, and there would be new challenges ahead, but they had survived the hardest part together. "Do you think they'll accept us?" Vayrana asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "The humans, after everything." Eric smiled, a small but reassuring gesture. "I think they will. You've earned their respect, Vayrana, and you've earned mine." Vayrana's eyes flickered, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a long time. "I never thought I'd be standing here, with you, as an ally. When I first arrived, all I knew was war. I didn't know what it meant to fight for something better. You found it," Eric said simply. "You found something worth fighting for." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. Eric knew that this moment, this fragile peace, wasn't just about the battle they had won. It was about the journey they had taken together, about the choices they had made. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the landscape, Eric turned to face Vayrana. "We have a lot of work ahead of us," he said, "but we don't have to do it alone anymore." Vayrana met his gaze, her expression softening. "No, we don't." The human soldiers, seeing their leaders standing together, began to gather around. There was still a sense of uncertainty, but also a sense of unity. They had fought together, and now they would rebuild together. The future was uncertain, but there was a new sense of hope in the air. A hope that despite the darkness of the past, they could create something better. Eric stepped forward, raising his hand to address the soldiers. We've won a great victory today, but it's not just about the battle. It's about what we do next. We have the chance to rebuild this world, to make it a place where everyone has a future. We fought for this. We've earned it. The soldiers cheered, their voices rising in unison. It wasn't just the victory they were celebrating. It was the future, the chance to build something worth living for. Vayrana stood beside Eric, her heart light. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't the weapon she had once been. She wasn't just a conqueror. She was part of something bigger, a cause that didn't involve destruction, but creation. Together, they had overcome the odds. Together, they would rebuild. As the night fell, and the stars began to shine above them, Eric and Vayrana sat side by side, watching the camp come to life with activity. There was no more fighting to be done, no more enemies to face. The future lay ahead of them, full of uncertainty, but also full of possibilities. We've come a long way, Vayrana said softly, her voice carrying a sense of wonder. We have, Eric replied, and we still have a long way to go, but we're not alone anymore. The stars above seemed brighter that night, as if even the universe itself was celebrating the new dawn that had arrived. The war was over. The battles had been fought. And now it was time for something new, something better.